I'm going to show you guys something I pulled out of a pre-built PC that was sent to me direct from Dell. It was a part of their Alienware Aurora lineup. The desktop itself had an i7-8700 in it, a GTX 1070, 16 gigs of RAM, the works, right, for a really sweet gaming PC. But pre-builts tend to cut corners, especially ones that come from a company like Dell, and this GTX 1070 right here is no exception. At first glance, you might think, oh, it looks like any other blower-style 1070, but no, and no, I'm not just complaining about the fact that the PCB is green. There are other issues with this card we'll get to in a second. Now, to be more specific, this is actually a solder mask. It's just a coating that they place over the board to protect the components on it. So it's been traditionally green, and that's why this one is green, I presume. It's probably cheaper to use than a darker polymer or something like white or even blue or red. I've seen all kinds of colors, but green is traditional and it's pretty cheap, so that's probably why they went with it. It's a way to save money, and I'm sure on thousands of boards that they manufacture, the cost adds up. Now, those savvy graphics card individuals out there are probably thinking to themselves, I know I've seen this blower style card before. Where have I seen this? Who manufactures this? This is actually from MSI. In fact, the PCB is also manufactured by MSI, but we'll get to that in a second. So the blower style here actually comes from MicroStar International, which is what MSI stands for. The blower style fan here originally had the MSI logo on it. It's been replaced by like a faux carbon fiber finish, and there is no back plate. The original PCB on the traditional MSI blower card is also much darker than this one. And while I haven't personally tested the MSI branded card, I can tell you that this one is manufactured with cheapness in mind. I mean, for example, just this part right here, below the SLI ports on the card, it's just a piece of thin plastic. It doesn't do anything. Why does this even exist? But enough about looks. If you're willing to buy a card this ugly, then you probably don't care much about the aesthetics anyway. You're more of a performance or value kind of guy. So let's see how it stacks up against the Founders Edition GTX 1070 from NVIDIA Direct. And a heaping disappointment. So the MSI card ran about 8 degrees hotter on average under full load with both its GPU and memory frequencies matched up for both cards. So the Founders Edition card was much cooler, and as a result was also much quieter. This card, it does a great job actually for what it is, for being quiet under load, and the MSI blower card did not manage to keep the same low profile. It was significantly louder and also ran significantly hotter. They both go hand in hand. Now, what NVIDIA tends to do is scale GPU frequency according to how much headroom is at the card's disposal. If the card, let's say, is running at around 60 degrees Celsius under load, then it will probably scale the frequency of the GPU up just a little bit until that card hits a higher temperature. It's basically trying to find the perfect balance of efficiency, temperature, and performance. And because the MSI card was running hotter natively, it wasn't allowed to reach the same frequencies the NVIDIA Founders Edition card was, although I will say that these temporary boosts in GPU frequency were just that, extremely temporary, and as a result, our frame rate disparities are basically, again, non-existent. I only ended up testing about 4 games between these two cards because the deltas were essentially non-existent, so you get the point. At first glance, this does appear to be a Founders Edition or a reference style PCB for the GTX 1070, so this is the exact same board you would find in the Founders Edition 1070, meaning that power delivery, power draw will pretty much be identical between the two, so no advantage was given to either one. This one again has just a single 8-pin VGA port for supplemental power, which is pretty incredible for a card this powerful. The fact that it only needs one of these is just really impressive, especially when you think about the fact that the 980 Ti, I believe, needed an additional 6-pin, and it was about on par with this card when it first came out. So I had to do a bit of research to find exactly where this card was being sold online. Again, because it's manufactured by Dell, they're not going to make an effort to sell these individually through retail outlets like Amazon and Newegg. So I actually looked at what was directly printed on the board. It says MicroStar, and then it says model MS-V347. And when you type this in, the title Dell GTX 1070 is what comes up, and that's another reason why I decided to name this video as such. Even though this is an MSI card, technically Dell's taking full ownership here. It's almost as if MSI told Dell, like, look, you guys can take our card, do whatever you want with it, but don't put our name on it. We don't want any part of this. If you're gonna cheap it out, just do it on your own watch, put it in your own systems. Don't use, you know, cases that have transparent side panels, because nobody wants to see that hideous green. And I think that's exactly what they did. That's why they cheaped out on the PCB. PCB, not from a design perspective, because it is, again, it's a reference board, but they cheaped out on the aesthetic part of it, and they used probably the cheapest cooler imaginable, despite being from MSI. I mean, this is also something MSI, I'm sure, would admit, not an expensive card. Blower style cards typically aren't, because they run hot and they run quite loud. They're good for ITX PC builds, but that's really about it. This card cuts a lot of corners again, and I guess I'm going to end this video talking a bit more about pre-builds, and pre-builds from Dell in particular. This is something you should definitely watch out for. You see, here's what companies like Dell like to do. Now, I'm not talking about all pre-builds. Obviously, if you're going to buy from somewhere like NZXT, if you want to do the build service, or if you're going to buy a pre-built from iBuyPower or Origin or CyberPower, most of those pre-built companies use components that you and I would typically buy on a daily basis. Now, they're not going to buy the most, expensive stuff unless you're willing to pay up, and that's totally cool. But a company like Dell will cheap out even more so than the average consumer ever possibly could in an effort to save more money and increase their margins. I won't lie, at first glance, I actually like the Dell Alienware R7. I like the outside of it. I liked how they, just kept subtle LED accents throughout. They have the RGB alien head was super cool. That's pretty iconic of the Alienware lineup. But when I opened the thing up, when I looked at the interior, the build itself, I just saw compromise after compromise after compromise, not just with the card, but also with the RAM, bare PCB green RAM. It's just like they're going to put the cheapest stuff they can in here. Again, that's how they make money. That's how they increase margins. They used an 8700, not an 8700K. They used one of the cheapest air coolers on that CPU I've ever seen. I think cheaper than the stock Intel cooler. Yeah, I kid you not, the build's power supply was literally sitting on top of the CPU cooler, which was a top flow cooler, mind you, so the air for that CPU was literally coming from a giant box. And the layout to this build was just inconsistent. I thought it was actually internally flawed, and that's why the system ended up running pretty hot and pretty loud, not only because of this guy, but also because the CPU wasn't getting any air. So guys, at the end of the day, this is what you get when you decide to have someone else build your PC for you. But to be more specific, someone else that doesn't care much about the build itself, but more about the profit margins. When you're willing to cut corners not only on the design factors of the build, but also on the functionality of the build, we have a problem. You won't find that much with some of the more reputable pre-builds like CyberPower and iBuyPower. Again, NZXT build uses components you and I would use, right? But a company like Dell is willing to cut more than one corner to make money. And that's what I want you guys to watch out for and take from this video. If you like this one, by the way, you can let me know by giving this one a thumbs up. I appreciate it. Thumbs down for the opposite. You can click that red subscribe button if you haven't already, and stay tuned for more content like this. This is Science Studio. Thanks for learning with us and cringing with us. I'll go ahead and say that one too.